Ladies and gentlemen, patch 0.50 just dropped, and it is enormous. Riot has actually changed so much about the game as far as accuracy, gunplay, even nerfing many of the top heroes, including Sage and Cypher. So what are we waiting for? Let's jump right into it. But before that, do me a big favor. If you like updates like these, smash that subscribe button, and we're going to be pumping them out consistently from here on out. Anyways, without further ado, let's just jump right into it, shall we? So the first change that they did is actually a change to walk accuracy. You no longer gain the walk accuracy when transitioning from run to stop. Now, this is a really common problem that you've probably seen before, where enemies have essentially ran around the corner, instantly stopped and headshotted you out of nowhere, but it looked like they didn't even really stop. It's like they're full speed running and then kill you out of nowhere. This was incredibly frustrating to deal with, and it felt like you, who are playing extremely slow, you're holding a position, you're essentially holding a position and you have the positional advantage, you're still dying to enemies that are just running on the corner. This is no longer the case anymore. But something important to understand is, in order to compensate for this big change, they've actually increased the dead zone accuracy speed from 25% to 30%. So what's important to understand is that there's actually a full accuracy state that's a little bit easier to get into when you start to decelerate now, slightly more. But as far as what this means for us, there's going to be still a similar amount of deceleration and accuracy, but it's going to look a lot less like a running headshot, which is probably going to feel better all in all. That being said, however, this most likely makes counter-strafing even more important than it was before. Now, before we move on, something else that they did is they specifically changed the base walk accuracy from 0.6 degrees of deviation to 0.8 degrees. This means they fundamentally nerfed just walking and shooting, especially from longer ranges, because it's actually felt a little bit too powerful, where someone could essentially just walk anywhere, but essentially just walk around the corner, and then they can just full speed walk and hit you even if you're standing still or crouching. This buffs crouching and standing still a little bit more and nerfs walk shooting, which is actually interesting, but many people have said that walking while shooting is a little bit too powerful. So this is the change that probably puts it more in line with CSGO mechanics as opposed to where it was before. Now, on top of this, they've done some fundamental changes to the guns. They've massively buffed burst fire. Now, let me give you this example. I would run through all the gun changes on the list and tell you exactly what this means and what it means for you. So firstly, the Vandal, the horizontal recoil was reduced by 15% while crouched and stationary. This was intended to be part of the Vandal, but for some reason, the Vandal was specifically not acting the way it should. So they put it in line with the other rifles with the reduced horizontal recoil as long as you're crouched and stationary. Now, as far as gun recovery time, for the Vandal, it's from 0.4 seconds to 0.375 seconds, with a tap efficiency from 4 to 6. The Phantom's gun recovery time is 0.55 seconds, down to 0.35 seconds, with a tap efficiency from 3 to 4. The Bulldog automatic fire, its gun recovery time is from 0.55 seconds to 0.35 seconds, and the Guardian, its recovery time is from 0.4 seconds to 0.35 seconds. Essentially, what this means is that the recovery time from when you start firing to stop firing, and then you could fire again at full accuracy, is decreased across the board for these 4 weapons. That is so important because now more than ever, to tap shoot is better than it ever has been. Burst fire shooting, where you fire in small bursts, you let your recoil recovery, gun recovery happen, and then you fire in small bursts again. This is probably going to be the de facto playstyle from now on. It's going to be far more consistent than it was before. Definitely try it out in your games and see how you like it, but I'm guessing it's going to be exactly what you want to be doing if you want to be accurate. Now, also, they changed the machine guns. Specifically, Ares, they reduced its price from 1,700 to 1,600 credits. They made it so that the firing is more consistent. You can check exactly what I mean by that down below in the description. And they reduced the amount of intensity of the horizontal recoil after the first 8 bullets, so it is overall more accurate and easier to control. They did this because they thought that it was just simply underpowered compared to a lot of the guns that people were using, like assault rifles, like a one-shot headshot. So they just pound for pound made it better and made it cheaper, which is good for everyone who wants to use an Ares. Now, with the Odin, they did something similar. They just reduced the intensity of the horizontal recoil after the first 8 bullets, similar to the Ares without the price change and the bug fixes. Now, let's talk about the bread and butter of the video, which is the agent update. There are some huge nerfs to some of your favorite characters right now, so let's get started. Let's talk about what those big nerfs are. Firstly, Sage's slow orb duration was decreased from 9 seconds to 7 seconds. That's right, that's a huge change. This makes her slow orb fundamentally quite a bit weaker because instead of a max of 18 seconds to slow, now you only have 14. That 4 seconds of difference might not seem like a lot, but it really is. And on top of that, her slow orb slowing effect was decreased from 65% to 50%, meaning it doesn't quite slow you as much anymore, and that coupled with the slow orb duration decrease really heavily nerfs Sage, as this is one of her most powerful abilities. I think Sage is still top tier, and I'm gonna break that down in my 0.5 hero tier list patch. But until then, you need to understand that Sage is not going to be as strong as she was before. Now moving on to Cypher. Cypher also got some pretty sizable nerfs. His Cyber Cage can no longer slow enemies, so enemies can push through it without being slowed. It blocks their LOS, but it will not slow them at all, which means a number of things, like it's harder to combo with his trap wire, and it's not as good for stopping enemies from pushing through it. Overall, I understand the change, but it does feel like this is a pretty sizable nerf to Cyber Cage, all things considered. And then the Spy Cam, its cooldown is now from 30 seconds to 45 seconds. Ugh, that's gross. That's a huge change to the Cypher Cam cooldown. I think that if you're using Cypher Cam, you need to be really extra diligent with it. You need to be very careful of putting it in a safer spot. Perhaps sacrificing information for safety is worth it in this regard. Putting it in some place that's far safer, doesn't get as much information, but at least it's not going to get destroyed. Because that 45-second cooldown is pretty sizable, it's actually pretty rough. This is a pretty big Cypher nerf, all things considered. Now moving on to Omen. Omen got some pretty big buffs, actually. His dark cover smoke went from 12 seconds to 15 seconds, and it moves faster, but its cooldown got increased from 30 to 35 seconds. Now, this is actually pretty cool because the smoke duration actually lines up with Brimstone's Cloud Smoke now. Which at the higher tiers of play, it just felt like there was no reason to play Omen because Brimstone's smokes lasted far more and that's what you wanted to use. But having a 15-second smoke that's on a cooldown is actually pretty cool, and I'm interested to see just how much more play Omen sees, especially at the highest tier of play, because I think that provides a good amount of utility, and maybe you want to be playing Omen with the Brimstone to smoke off potentially all the LOS from the enemy, which is pretty cool. So I do think that this is a pretty big Omen buff, which is cool and exciting for Omen mains out there. Now, Viper got a small buff in that her snake bite radius went from 350 to 450. It's a small buff, but it's something, and it's nice to have it on Viper. Now, one of the other big changes to heroes is in order to be out of damaging abilities, you need to actually be from 80 off the ground to 120 off the ground. And the tick rate for these abilities is faster, even though they do the same amount of DPS. Now, I know this is complicated to understand, but all you need to know is that bunny hopping is not as good anymore at protecting you from things like snakebite and molly and fireball. All these things will still damage you a lot, so bunny hopping is really nerfed with this patch. Now, before we move away from the hero changes, we need to talk about some of the big changes that has happened to a lot of the abilities in their cost. Sage Barrier Orb got increased from 300 to 400 credits. That's another big nerf. It's another big nerf to Sage, which is sad. I mean, I do think she was the best character in the game, but that's a huge nerf as well, in addition to the other nerfs she received. Raze's Blast Pack got increased from 100 to 200 credits. That's an interesting nerf to Raze, actually. Phoenix's Curveball got increased from 100 to 200 credits. That is a nerf that I actually do not agree with. It's actually pretty ugly for Phoenix, because something cool about Phoenix is that you could buy in econ rounds, you could still buy your curveballs, your flashes, to try to get some unfair advantages in gunfights. And now, having to buy 2 of them for 400 creds, that's a lot of money, and I don't know if you can justify buying 2 of them even on econ rounds. That's a pretty sizable nerf in my mind to Phoenix, even if it doesn't look like much at first. Now, Brimstone's Incinerary increased from 200 to 300 creds. Not quite sure why they did this change, probably because he was really good at the highest tier, but I don't think his Incinerary was that good in the first place. I don't really understand this one, but I get why they wanted to hit him somewhere. They didn't want to fundamentally change his smokes or anything like that. Now, Jet's updraft was actually reduced from 200 credits to 100 credit. Woo, that's actually pretty cool. Jet was probably one of the weakest characters on the list. While I don't think this will change her on the tier list, like I said, I'm going to be breaking down the changes to all these heroes and what they mean for the tier list, the 0.5 patch tier list, but I don't think that this greatly changes Jet's place on the tier list. Now, moving along, this is a big change for economy's sake. The total credit cap is now 9,000 from 12,000. This is a humongous change. It really is, because of the fact of Snowball. The thing is, if the enemy won the first 2 rounds, they would get a snowball of money where they could win and win and win and keep pocketing money. And by the time you actually finally flip it, they have so much money in the bank, they all buy freaking ops, or they all buy the best weapons, they have all their cooldowns, and it just feels like it's impossible to overwhelm them or come back. Now comebacks are going to be a lot easier. the distance that the enemy can propel themselves into the advantage territory is not as big. So I do understand this change. It's going to be interesting how this plays out. But just keep in mind that even if a game feels like it's far away, in reality, it's not really that far away because you can't rely on your economy advantage to carry you through if you got an initial lead. So just keep that in mind. Now, on top of that, there are lots of tweaks to the map split, and there's lots of bug fixes and quality of life changes I'm not going to really cover here. But if you want to go check it out, the full patch list is going to be in the description down below. On top of this, something that might excite you unless you are a scumbag is the majority of Cypher cameras, the broken ones, have been patched out. So the ones that were in the map, that were impossible to kill, that saw information that they shouldn't have saw, all those are patched out. So everyone should be really happy, and really big thanks to everyone who found those. That is a great job, and it really helped Riot deal with them very quickly. Anyways, if you found this helpful, do me a favor and smash that subscribe button. We're going to keep you up to date on all the news, and you don't want to miss out on our brand new 0.5 weapon tier list and hero tier list that's going to be out later this week. Anyways, if you have any questions, comments, if you like the change, didn't like the change, definitely let me know in the comments down below, and I would love to hear your feedback. Anyways, that's all I got for you today. I'm Coach Mills, and until next time.